Hello and welcome to Politics at Jack and Sam's Daily, the podcast that picks itself up from last night's Spectator Party and powers into the day ahead in British politics with gusto and enthusiasm.
My name is Jack Blanchard of Politico. With me, as always, is a definitely not hungover Sam Coates of Sky News. And while the Prime Minister may be swanning around in Washington, we are very much left back here on the tarmac to talk about the day ahead in British politics. Sam, three big things we need to talk about today. Clearly, Keir Starmer's trip to the NATO summit in Washington is the main event. He'll be there all day. We'll talk people through what's happening with that. We'll be discussing the ongoing business of government back in the UK as well, more ministerial appointments, more speculation about who's getting what job and various policy bits too. And of course, last but not least, or possibly they are least now, the Conservative Party leadership contest continues. There was a party at the Spectator last night, as Sam says, with lots of speculation about who's going to end up as leader. And we'll be talking you through where that is at as well. But let's start with NATO, Sam. This has been in the diary for a long time, and it was always looming on the agenda for whoever won last week's general election that one of the very first things they would need to do was leave Downing Street, get on a plane and get over to Washington to meet the most powerful leaders in the Western world. And that is what Keir Starmer is going to spend the day doing. He's never met Joe Biden before. He will be doing that today in the White House. He'll also be meeting President Zelensky. He'll be meeting Olaf Scholz from Germany and others as well. Whether he manages to take time out of his schedule to watch the football, I'm not sure. But it's going to be a real day of diplomacy for him, and talk about just a baptism of fire, really. You know, talking about being thrown into the job. He's barely had time to catch breath, barely had time to catch up on any sleep since winning the election last Thursday night. And now here he is, stateside, in one of the most important summits, probably the most important summit of the year, given the context of war in Europe and the sort of spectre of Donald Trump looming over it all as well.
The thing he's being pressed on domestically is when he is going to commit Britain to increasing its defence spending from 2%, which many NATO countries, 2% of GDP, which many NATO countries honour, up to 2.5%. Now, you'll remember the Conservatives, before the election, promised to do it in this decade and spent a lot of the election campaign asking Keir Starmer the same question. Now, that role seems to have been passed on to former generals, including Lord West of Spithead, who, of course, once upon a time was a Labour minister himself, as well as a senior figure in the Navy. And as a consequence, that's the debate that the journalists on the plane flying over with him chose to focus on. He gave an interview in advance of getting on the plane saying that he was committed to the 2.5% of GDP target, but said he would do so only within our fiscal rules and after a strategic defence review, which he said needed to be taken place first. So again, and I think Keir Starmer is quite good at this. We're getting that sense of just, defensive shots, staying on the wicket and just batting stuff back without giving new information, hoping an issue will go away. So he is stonewalling the question of when, to the evident frustration of some in the armed forces. But I think he's clearly adopted the tactic of just thinking he needs to buy himself time before he can start making big decisions on things like this, as opposed to kind of the slightly smaller stuff that we've already heard.
It puts Britain in a slightly tricky position, though, the change of government. This summit was supposed to be all about this shift from 2% of GDP to 2.5% of GDP. Basically, the West spending more on defence for two reasons. One, obviously, because of Russian aggression, and also to try and impress Donald Trump and show that Donald Trump, if he were to come back as president, that we really are committed to this and we're not just completely reliant on American finance and might. And Britain has been preparing for this big summit. It's the 75th anniversary of NATO. They do this every year, but this is a really big one. That's why they're having it in Washington. Obviously, as I say, the context of the war makes it more important as well. Britain was supposed to be going there to send this message to allies that, come on, we all need to do this. We all need to increase spending to 2.5%. That's been the sort of diplomatic push behind the scenes from Britain for months. And now a Prime Minister comes in who's not actually got a plan for how to get there. And Downing Street were putting out quotes last night with Starmer urging NATO allies to get to 2.5%. But the message isn't really going to land if he's just got this sort of vague ambition to do it at some point with no real plan. I mean, anyone can say that in any NATO country. How are you going to pay for it is obviously kind of the important bit that gives it a bit of legs, and Keir Starmer doesn't have that. And, saying I'm going to come up with a plan after a defence review, well, how long does a defence review take? They tend to take quite a long time for understandable reasons. You have to consider Britain's place in the world and the scale of our forces and what do we really need for the next decade and all the rest of it. You don't do these things overnight. So it could be rather a long time before Britain's in a place to say even how it is going to get to this spending target, which isn't really the sort of argument that's going to be winning over other NATO allies, I suspect, when Starmer meets them today.
I was reading the transcript of the discussion between Keir Starmer and the journalists on the plane, and I'm going to make a sort of trite point that I also think is quite important. Keir Starmer said, look, the defence of the nation is the number one priority for my government. Now, that's all very well, and Prime Ministers often say that, but I could swear in the last few days, growth has been the number one priority for the government, and other things will be the number one priority for the government. And actually, governing is all about trade-offs, and I don't feel we've seen that much of the mettle of Keir Starmer until we start seeing some of the big trade-offs that he is going to make. Anyway, there's a state banquet that he and his wife Victoria will be going to at the White House later this evening. He was pushed by journalists whether or not he'd be watching the football. He might do it with the Netherlands Prime Minister, but he also said that when he's in that NATO meeting, which is at 6 o'clock UK time, leaders' phones are taken off them. And he said, no doubt we'll be passed lots of notes with really important information about the summit, but one or two of these notes hopefully will be an update on the score, because I'm not going to be able to get it otherwise. So there you go, an almost fully focused Prime Minister on that. I'm pleased to report the first row on the plane took place. It was about whether or not the conversation between Keir Starmer and the journalists could be broadcast, not something that's happened in the past. It got a little tetchy, I'm told. So nice to see that all of our friends who were in the air and landed in the early hours of the morning are having a great time.
And then Starmer has this weird day of diplomacy where he meets all these various NATO leaders who are all in slightly different, weakened positions at home. He's got to meet Zelensky, who's obviously in the middle of a war. He's got to meet Olaf Scholz, who I think he gets on quite well with. They're both the centre-left leaders. They've met before, but Scholz deeply unpopular in Germany and facing enormous political pressure back home. Starmer's got to meet the US House Speaker Mike Johnson. I can't imagine they're going to get on like a house on fire, frankly. And then he goes to the Oval Office to meet Joe Biden. Now, this should be, well, it is for any, new Prime Minister. This is a big moment in your life. The first time you go to the White House, the first time you meet a US president, the most important relationship any Prime Minister can have. And yet the sort of backdrop to this is what we've been watching play out with Joe Biden, the fact, and he's obviously having problems, walking and speaking and these sorts of things. He's facing re-election in November, and it's far from clear whether he's even going to be the candidate. So all the time that Starmer is trying to build this important relationship, as I say, the most important relationship, he can build, he's got this thing in the back of his mind that this is ongoing, and maybe Biden will be out in a couple of weeks' time, or maybe this guy is a lame duck, and really we should be preparing for Donald Trump. Makes it for a much more awkward meeting than some of the the great ones of the past when we've seen leaders go over there. You remember Blair going over to meet George Bush or previously Clinton and all that sort of thing, and building a strong relationship with those people. It's harder to do that given the backdrop to this.
And the other goal of this summit is to start the conversation about a security pact with EU leaders who are there, as you were saying yesterday. It's fascinating that he's taken Nick Thomas-Symonds, who is not in the cabinet, alongside John Healey, David Lammy, who's bit of a job Nick Thomas-Symonds seems to have. But just to even to begin that straight away elevates Nick Thomas-Symonds to really quite an important role at Keir Starmer's side outside of the Foreign Office, reporting directly to the Prime Minister. I'm interested how that role's going to shake down in the fullness and time. Should we talk a little bit about domestic stuff? Keir Starmer was sworn in as an MP yesterday, one of the first to take the oath. Just a reminder, Keir Starmer is an atheist, so he did not take the oath. He basically took the oath to affirm rather than a religious oath, meaning that he said that he solemnly, sincerely and truly declared that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty the King Charles, his heirs and successors, according to the law. So just a little note that not only is he vegetarian, pescatarian, but an atheist as well. And that kicked off a day not only of ceremony, but of little bits and pieces of political importance. Lindsay Hoyle was in significant trouble earlier this year with 60-odd MPs calling for him to be ousted from the Speaker's chair. But yesterday, as Stephen Flynn put it, the SNP leader in Westminster, let bygones be bygones, and he was put back in that chair for the whole 5-year term without any opposition at all. Even Nigel Farage rallying round him, even if he took a pop at John Bercow, the little man, as Nigel Farage had it. We got the first, basically, opening speeches from all the different leaders, quite gracious from Rishi Sunak, more apologetic to the people behind him than attacking of the people in front of him. And the business of government just really sort of starting to get going. A lot of it sort of slightly below the surface, I thought.
The other thing that's going on, of course, in government is the appointment of junior ministers. This is still going on. It's now Wednesday morning. It's almost a week since the election. The government is still being formed. We got a load more announcements last night, and I was reasonably surprised to see 5 new MPs going straight into government. Sam, I wonder, we knew there were some sort of rising stars in this intake, but I thought they might be given 6 or 12 months to sort of get their feet under the table and figure out how to be an MP before you go straight into Whitehall and become a minister. But no, some notable names on that list. Kirsty McNeil, who used to work for Gordon Brown in Number 10, has gone straight into the Scotland office. Georgia Gold, who used to run Camden Council, in fact maybe she still does, is straight in at the Cabinet Office on day 5 of being an MP. Miata Fambula, who you'll know ran a think tank and used to work for Ed Miliband, has gone straight into Ed Miliband's department as a junior minister. There's a couple of others as well, and I just think it's an indication of how quickly some of the Starmerites are going to rise up this government. I think, Sam, I wouldn't be surprised if some of these sorts of people had cabinet jobs pretty quickly, because it's long been said that Keir Starmer doesn't really have his own tribe within the Parliamentary Labour Party. He was seen as borderline, as sort of a bit of a loner almost for quite a few years. Now, with this huge new intake of MPs, of course, the Parliamentary Labour Party is completely different, and within them are a big bunch of people who Starmer rates very highly, who have either worked closely with him or who's been handpicked by his team to come into Parliament. And we are seeing the creation of the Starmer tribe before our very eyes right now, and obviously puts him in an even more powerful position within his party than he already was.
All new MPs are equal, but some new Labour MPs are more equal than others. I wouldn't want to be Alan Campbell, because he's the Labour chief whip, having to ensure discipline. Because if you were maybe a 2017 or 2015 Labour MP in one of those intakes, and you're looking at people leapfrogging you straight into government, then that always rankles. There's a reason why they often hold off on these early appointments. Anyway, we're talking about appointments. Let's talk about another one. A beaming Jonathan Ashworth turned up at the Spectator Party last night. He, of course, putting on a brave face because he lost his Leicester seat last week after a big surge in votes connected to Gaza. He already now has another job. There is a think tank called Labour Together, a Starmerite think tank that was run by Josh Simons until last Thursday, when Josh was elected as an MP in the Greater Manchester region. Now, Jonathan Ashworth has taken that gig, which is interesting, because it's not entirely clear to me what the role of Labour Together will be now that Labour is in power and it's at the early stages of government. It was an incredibly well-funded outfit, but will it continue to be? Will donors give money? There's some suggestions that they'll give money for a few more months, but what of this new outfit that Jonathan Ashworth is taking over from today? Is it going to be a berth that carries him through for any period of time? Couple of quick things to keep an eye on in the government as well. Tony Blair Institute had a big conference yesterday that we were talking about. I went there. Very, very glitzy. I have to say, Labour do policy conferences in a way that bluntly, the Tories never felt they used to. But big sort of powerhouse Blair in the room, in the conference hall for most of it, shepherding along and weaving between the guests. There are all sorts of members of his administration there. The conversation that struck me the most was with Hilary Armstrong. Now, she was the chief whip under Tony Blair for many, many years, including through the Iraq War, and knows this administration well. And I said to her, well, what would you most like to see this government do that they perhaps haven't yet? Where would you want them to go further? And she was instantly clear: digital ID. Now, this might be an idea that you might have had the impression was sort of dead and buried from comments by, certainly ID cards, by comments by other members of the cabinet. But Hilary Armstrong, who used to employ Peter Keir, said that as her aide, said that Peter Keir is looking at digital ID in the science department very closely, and Keir Starmer is mulling it as well. Now, she said it on camera, on the record, and was very clear about this. And I know from talking to other members of the Now cabinet, there is enthusiasm for digital ID pretty much across the cabinet, apart from with Yvette Cooper. So it's not an idea that the party says it embraces. It's been rejected in the last few days, but I know that there is enthusiasm. And now you have somebody very close to Peter Keir saying that work on that is already going on. So keep a close eye on that.
The return of ID cards. I love it. It's just like New Labour never went away. We just had this weird 14-year hiatus where things went a bit, Tory and crazy and then very extremely crazy. And now we're back and we'll just carry on with the work we're doing before. I seem to remember Gordon Brown was planning to build new towns and he had all these house building targets that all got scrapped in 2010. They're all coming back again. Is it just like the last 14 years never happened?
Yeah, well, let's see what happens. On the subject of digital stuff and Labour, very impressed. Apparently, last night, Google got in there with the new MPs on the Labour side. There was a PLP, Parliamentary Labour Party reception at Google's HQ near Tottenham Court Road. 231 of the 411 Labour MPs are new and presumably impressionable. I mean, that's quite a lobbying exercise from one of the big companies. Should we do our 2 minutes on the Tories?
The 2-minute Tories. My goodness, how the mighty have fallen. Yes, the most interesting thing happening with the Tories today, Sam, according to my Playbook colleague Dan Bloom, who says that Rishi Sunak is going to address the 1922 Committee of Backbenchers this afternoon. That should be a meeting worth listening to. I wonder what the Tory backbench gang make of Rishi Sunak, given what happened over the last 6 weeks and what's happened to so many of their friends and colleagues who are no longer with them in Parliament. Is that going to be a meeting that's going to go down well? Is that going to be a little stormy? I wonder if a few people might tell him exactly what they think of him in the way that Kemi Badenoch apparently did at Shadow Cabinet meeting yesterday in an extremely well-briefed diatribe against the Prime Minister, which immediately found its way into newspapers and explained exactly what leadership Kemi Badenoch thought went wrong during the campaign. That sort of posturing from people like Kemi Badenoch, Priti Patel, Vicky Atkins, Tom Tugendhat, we sort of know the parameters of this leadership contest already. You can expect to see lots more of that over the next few weeks and indeed months if this leadership contest does indeed go long, as it's starting to feel like it might, Sam.
And Steve Baker responded to Kemi Badenoch's briefed outburst at 5:51 a.m. this morning, which is the kind of time where I am really here for new content, tweeting in response to what Kemi Badenoch said, saying, denial, anger, bargaining, depression and acceptance. Stages of the Tory leadership contest.
There you go. All MPs who want to appear on this podcast, you now know what you need to do. Send out tweets at about 5, just nearly 6 a.m. when we're just figuring out what we're going to talk about. That is your window of opportunity to appear on this.
Look, there's a new poll of Tory members this morning, a survey for the party members, Tim Bale's Party Members Project, run out of Queen Mary University of London and Sussex University. And that does the first survey of Tory members about the leadership contest. And it suggests that Kemi Badenoch is in front, getting 31%. Suella Braverman is second on 16%, Tom Tugendhat on 15%, Priti Patel right down on 6%, Robert Jenrick on 7%, and Victoria Atkins on just 2%. And it suggests that the membership, who are probably the most right wing of the various bits of the Tory party, are evenly split on whether the Tories should merge with Nigel Farage. The battle is not just about who, it's about how long. I had a very senior Tory backbencher telling me that they ought to run this contest until Christmas because whoever's the new leader has got to be tested. Others think that's just going to open the field for reform on the right and the Labour Party from the other side just rubbishing the Tory brand incessantly if it doesn't have a leader. It's a mess. They're arguing. It feels like things are going to get worse before they get better.
A final word for Suella Braverman, who was speaking very vocally in both America and at the POP conference this week here in the UK. I cannot find anybody who thinks Suella Braverman's got a hope of being Tory leader now. So the words I keep hearing about her again and again are busted flush. And according to Harry Cole in The Sun this morning, even John Hayes, who was her closest friend and ally and supporter and the guy she was emailing all those confidential documents to that time she got sacked, or one of those times she got sacked as Home Secretary, has now switched to support Robert Jenrick, according to that report. So were that to be true, then it really might be a sort of party of one for Suella Braverman at this point, but who knows? Who knows? There's still plenty of time to go in this contest.
Well, let's see where she is tomorrow and whether she's still in the race. We'll be back in 24 hours. Very nice to see you tomorrow.
Have a lovely day. See you tomorrow morning.